president of Brazil once said, "I prefer the noise of a free press to the silence of the dictatorships." And I think in South Africa, too many of us take our democracy for granted. Of course, elections are very important. At regular intervals, you need the right to, if you like, throw the rascals out and try a new bunch. But democracies are about so much more than only elections. Now, this project started with a big question. You can put it like this. In 2008, Western democratic capitalism was knocked off its pedestal. Fairly and unfairly, it looked like this was not the only game in town, and that this model was no longer working as well as many people thought it had. At the same time, rather non-democratic China seemed to be doing rather well. High economic growth rates, lifting hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. Can we turn the spotlight towards the democratic societies in the developing world? Is there a democratic market-based alternative emerging in the South? So why did we choose 3 countries, India, Brazil and South Africa? Well, they're the democracies in the BRICS grouping, and they have formed their own grouping, IPSA. These are 3 very important countries in their regions and continents, and it's vital for not only their own countries, but for their regions and, I would argue, the world, that these 3 countries really do well. We decided to start with the achievements of these 3 countries. And in the past 25 years or so, 3 very different countries have notched up what are significant achievements. Some 25, 30 years ago, they each faced economic crisis. They responded to this by introducing fiscal discipline and market reforms, and this has resulted in real progress within vibrant democratic cultures. All of this, coupled with urbanization and some effective social policies, has led to single-digit poverty figures, single-digit unemployment figures, and a Gini coefficient that measures inequality that is going in the right direction. South Africa, the smallest country of the 3 at 52 million. Over the past 20 years of democratic rule, our economy has grown from some $80 billion to $400 billion. Significant numbers of people have been moved out of poverty, and millions of South Africans now have access to services that they never had before. What is happening in these 3 liberal constitutional democracies is a massive process of inclusion and development. The second part of our report looks at what we call the democratic advantage, and we looked at corruption. Now, corruption is prevalent in almost every society we know of, whatever kind of government system there is, but we tried to see whether you had more advantages in fighting it in a democratic society. Democratic societies are not more corrupt than authoritarian states. What does happen is there's a lot more noise about corruption. There are all sorts of ways in which corruption in a democratic society can be exposed and sometimes effectively dealt with. Authoritarian states are a bit like a black box. You open it every now and then for a show trial, but then you close it all down, and who knows how much corruption is going on behind the veil of silence and the lack of a free press. All 3 societies now are facing economic challenges, economic stagnation. They're in serious economic trouble. Now, there are very similar problems holding back growth in all 3 societies. The costs of doing business are high. Microeconomic reforms have not been implemented and are desperately needed. Rent seeking is pervasive. For example, civil servants can retire at the age of 50 in Brazil with rather generous pensions. South Africa has what the President of Business Leadership South Africa once called the economic terrorism of tenderpreneurs. And India still has many over-regulated economic sectors with respect to minerals, land, telecoms, which has led to massive corruption and scandals. All three have very weak education systems. They've expanded access, but the quality of education for very large numbers of people is bad. They have stagnant or declining manufacturing sectors, far too little labor-intensive manufacturing. They have rigid and complex labor markets, and they have infrastructure delivery problems, mainly because the state wants to do it all itself rather than bringing in public-private partnerships or the private sector. To add to all this, their new middle classes, in a way their successors, people they've brought out of poverty, are now getting restive. Many of them are heavily indebted. They're now urbanized, so they're in the cities and they're finding their voice, and protests are rising. We're arguing that in all three countries, a second wave of reform is required, if you like. All four countries need to deepen their democracies. They need to strengthen transparency and accountability to combat corruption. All of them need further market liberalization and greater appreciation, public selling of the power of markets, private companies and entrepreneurs. State competence and capacity need serious attention in all three countries. And then lastly, all three countries have introduced policies to help the poor, but we are arguing that in many ways this would be a very good time for a major reassessment of how they are dealing with redress for their discriminatory and difficult pasts, and how to bring the poor more into, or more effectively, into the modern society. It's easy to identify what should be done, but it's much harder to implement. It would be nice to stand here and argue that democracy is essential for growth and development, but this is empirically incorrect. Some authoritarian states have delivered. But if you ask the question differently, do countries have to give up their freedoms if they are to deal with poverty? Can you have growth and development and inclusion as well as human rights and freedoms? We think the evidence from India, Brazil and South Africa is compelling. It's not democracy that is holding back these three countries. None of these countries offer a blueprint. Nonetheless, they do offer important lessons for other developing countries. So, ladies and gentlemen, in our view, there is a democratic alternative emerging from the South. India, Brazil and South Africa embody this, and they're three pivotal countries to watch to see if they can implement the second wave of reforms so necessary for growth and inclusion to continue and expand.
You mentioned that we should not be stuck in the politics of the past. You spoke about democracy and markets, a second wave of reforms, and finally you mentioned that there is indeed a democratic alternative. I am now going to invite our Minister of International Relations and Cooperation to come and lead with a response. Over to you, Minister.
Confirming this report that you are presenting to us, Ann. It took the Finnish 60 years of social democratic rule to get to where they are today. So they no longer care who governs the country, whether it's a coalition or what. They will do democratic elections or what, but no Finnish now depends on any government. What's the population of Finland? Not more than 5 million. Did they ever experience apartheid? No. They were just dealing with their past, that they do not have the kind of natural resources or mineral deposits that we have. You know, there are times when you listen to the cacophony in this country, just about how impatient we are against ourselves, that we even forget the strides, positive strides we have taken moving forward. So when we go through NCD's report, let's start with when we say we don't want to get stuck in the past. In the 20 years of our democracy. What have we learned? What do we want to fix? If we are to indeed enter into this new wave of reforms and second phase of democratic reforms, we should start asking ourselves, every other developing country is talking about foreign direct investments. You know, if we do this, investors won't come. Who are they? If MTN has become an investor, if SAB Miller is an investor in another country, what kind of conditionalities do companies that come to South Africa, come from South Africa or originate from South Africa, what kind of conditionalities do they put to other countries? What differentiate them? Where is the domestic investment? What is the contribution? What kind of partnership? Has business come to the party in South Africa? If you ask me if business has come to the party in Brazil, I will say yes. If you say, has business come to the party in India? My answer is yes. Tata. Do you know Tata? The company? Before they become a major investor in South Africa, they are a major investor in India. Where is our capital? Who is going to be fixing this model, this thing that we are trying to build that is only 20 years old? This is how do we enter the second wave when we are refusing to deal with this very, very stubborn pockets of inequality, of unemployment, and poverty. So our model needs to work. We need both the political, we need capital, we need our social partners to know that there is no place like home. We must protect our Chapter 9 institutions. We also have to know that this democracy is young, so we are going to make mistakes, and we are making mistakes. We need proper watchdogs. But the watchdogs themselves are still in the phase of finding their feet. So we have no perfect institution at the moment, but it needs all of us to guard all these institutions jealously. This report gives us an opportunity to say there is no other solution outside us that is going to help us fix that we need fixing in this country, starting with our own capital, having confidence and investing in this country, about having leadership that has to be accountable, that we make accountable, that we work on social cohesion, because it took South Africans themselves to fix that needed fixing when we went to CODESA. We still have an opportunity. People still look at us and respect who we are and what we are about. Let's use this report to march forward positively.
Minister, thank you very much for that wonderful contribution, insights and input. I am now going to invite Mr. Justice Malala, who is a political commentator and a newspaper columnist, to come and make his own contribution.
In 1989, if you've gone and counted the number of democracies on this continent, you'd have counted Botswana, the Gambia. I think there were 3. We weren't part of them. So it's there is a good story to tell, and it should be told, and I'm glad the ANC has told it. That said, I think I should reflect as well on what we are going through currently. I get very worried when we are not explicit in our condemnation of Mr. Kebima Patso, for example, on his extraordinary attack on a former member of his own organization, by the way, someone who was appointed by the very same administration that he serves as a deputy minister in. And when you have silence around that, a Chapter 9 institution is being attacked so incredibly by a leading member of the ruling party, then we have a problem. And I think that is a red flag for me, that Chapter 9 institutions, and I acknowledge that these are the Chapter 9 institutions that were written into this constitution with the leadership of the ANC. And yet you have these kinds of eruptions. And he's not the only one. There have been many, many other attacks of that nature. For many of us who work in media, the fact that President Zuma has on his desk now the Protection of State Information Act, which has been passed already and awaits his signature, I am hopeful that President Zuma will send it back and say it will not pass constitutional muster. But it does not add to the democracy that we enjoy and have enjoyed over the past 20 years. I think the perception that one can get away with it, that there is no consequence, that builds into the culture of a new country, and it is one that should stop. So if I am to be absolutely frank, I believe that we have a good story to tell, as the ANC has said in the run-up to the elections, but we do need to acknowledge that we seem to be falling behind on crucial aspects of who we are. We need a participatory democracy. The fact that so many people fought, died, were tortured, and all these things for this democracy, I think, pushes us to want to see our people continuing to be as active as they have been. For me, the key thing about the report is that it touches on a point that both of you ended off on, and it's about leadership. It's about decisive leadership. On page 22, I have the advantage of having read the report before you guys, but I'll read to you what one part which I really thought was opposite for us here in South Africa, and it's where you quote Gurcharan Das in India, who says, "India reforms furtively because no political party has bothered to explain the difference between being pro-market and pro-business, leaving people with the impression that liberal reforms help mostly the rich. They don't understand that a pro-market economy fosters competition, which helps keep prices low, raises the quality of products, and leads to a rules-based capitalism that serves everyone." Now, you might not believe in the kind of economy that he's talking about. But for me, the key thing is for leadership, whether it's leadership in business, leadership in government, to say, this is what I stand for, and this is why I believe it's good for you. When you have clarity of thought, clarity of leadership like that, then we can all make decisions. But leadership that doesn't make a decision leads to all kinds of confusion. And one of those confusions is that you have populists coming along, people who will promise you that we will nationalize all the mines in South Africa, and suddenly the people of Alexandra across the road here, not 15 minutes away, their lives will be totally transformed because we have nationalized the mines. For me, the key thing about the report is about leadership. It's about making clear choices and saying these are the ones. We in South Africa have embraced the kind of democracy that we have embraced. You're absolutely right. We are the leaders. We are exemplary. People look at our constitution, say it's fantastic. Well, part of it is that it's messy. If you're running South Africa Inc., you will have, because of the nature of openness that this democracy gives us, you will have a Julius Malema in your ear every day, calling you names, saying this, saying that. That is what we bought into. That is what we adopted, and it's a good thing that you can have people like him, people like Mmusi Maimane and others doing and saying and criticizing and so forth and so forth. But key for me is that the success that you mentioned in this report, and is that people used that democracy with all the noise and all the challenges and all this. They still said, this is where I believe. That's why in South Africa, for example, we could attain nearly 6% GDP growth in the mid-2000s, sure, on a fantastic global economy, but we had made clear choices. And I think the biggest challenge to us is that we could start going backwards, because we're not coming out and saying these are the clear choices that we have made about our democracy, about our economy, and about the democracy that we enjoy today, and continue to exploit, which we should be doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Justice, for that excellent contribution. Thanks very much and have a good evening.